My name is Tom Clendon and I am an SBR lecturer. Welcome to this session, which is to help you prepare for sitting the SBR exam in a computer-based environment. Now, the ACCA has already published a 12-page PDF document giving guidance on this area, and I would also very specifically draw your attention to 4 fabulous videos that are also available on the ACCA website. Now, what I want to do with this session is perhaps take it one step further and have a little bit of a practical demonstration. I want to mimic effectively what a good student would do in the computer-based environment, in the computer-based exam. So that's my main objective, really, to show you on a hands-on way how the CBE system works with SBR. Now, 2 other things may come out of this. Hopefully, I'll be able to demonstrate to you a little bit of exam technique, and there may be some technical content that you can pick up on. I'm going to use a past exam question. I'm going to use question 1 from the March-June 2019 exam. Now, you may or may not be familiar with that question. It doesn't really matter. I've chosen the beginning of this question. I'm not going to work the full question because the beginning of the question demonstrates how we answer questions with words and with numbers. So I'll be able to show you the constructed response options of both the word processor and the spreadsheet where we start to use numbers. So that's it. I want to get on with things. So let's get started. So when you log on to the TestReach, the ACCA online platform to practice yourself, this is the first screen that you get when you enter into the March-June 2019 past examination international paper. And what the ACCA are doing here is providing you with the opportunity to practice. And so it's about using this format so you become familiar with the workspace. You become familiar with the features contained within the live exam. Now, I'm not going to read word for word, but this page is not something that you would see in the actual exam. What you see in the actual exam is the following 4 pages of instructions. And what I would like to emphasize is that although you have 10 minutes in the exam to review this, please make sure you have read and digested this information in some detail before the actual exam. So that 10 minutes can be spent breathing, that 10 minutes can be spent composing yourself, and of course reviewing the information just in case. So it reminds you about the introductory, the exhibits, the requirements, the response options, etc. The instructions also tell us how to navigate. You notice that I have been using the next button in the bottom right hand corner to move on to the next screen. Flag for review probably is not a big thing for SBR, and ideally you won't be using the help button in the actual exam because you'll be so familiar with the technology through having done practice. I'll show you how the calculator works. There's an online calculator, although of course you are fully entitled to take your own calculator into the exam, providing it meets the requirements. In other words, it's not a programmable calculator. There's a workings, there's a scratch pad area, and I'll show you where that is and how that works. But the thing to note about the scratch pad is that it's not going to be marked by the marker. All right, so anything you put there is really for your own purposes. You can cut and paste and copy it out into your answer, but it's not part of your answer. I'll show you how the navigator screen works when we actually get going. At the end of the exam, you get the chance to review it before you finally submit end of exam. And obviously, don't do that during the exam. It's something you do right at the very end of the exam, your final thing that you do. So those are the 4 pages of instructions that you will see in the exam. So here we are. We're almost about to start, and you are reminded before you do start that the exam is 100 marks, and the exam is a compulsory Every question counts. And if I press the next button, then that actually starts the exam. Right, so I'm ready to start the exam. So I click on next and I get a confirmation that yes, I am ready to start the exam. So this is the information that we're faced with. It's a reminder that section A contains 2 questions and they aggregate 50 marks. In our answers, we're going to have to say which question we're answering. Now, this is what we're faced with. This is the format. This is the look of the question. Now, if you're anything like me, you're curious about the whole paper and you want to know what the exam is about. And I would therefore suggest that the first thing you click on is the requirements of question 1. And I'm not going to highlight the information here. This is a very, very skim read, but I've got here information that tells me that the question is about foreign currency, functional currency, that we've got to calculate goodwill, that in A part 3 we've got to explain goodwill, explain exchange differences, more about exchange differences and calculating the profit or loss on the disposal and explaining things. So this is exactly the consistent style of the exam. Question 1 on group accounts and other issues to do with some numbers but lots of explaining. Now I'm just going to close that off because I want to know what the whole paper is about. So let's have a quick next, and here we are in question 2, which we know is going to be on ethical issues. So again, I'm diving into the requirements. This is again a very high level overview to satisfy my curiosity. What we've got here in part A is a story about pensions. So obviously a key technical accounting standard. And in part B, there's a story about deferred tax. And as you would expect in question 2, it's about the ethical issues that have arisen in the question and a little bit of professional marks for writing articulately, writing in a considered way, giving a complete answer. So again, I'm just going to close that off. What's in section B, I wonder? You're just reminded that in section B, you've got 2 questions and they are both for 25 marks. And question B in this exam was about crypto, which had a variety of requirements, partly about joint arrangements, some foreign currency derivatives there, some financial instruments, and some leasing. So it really demonstrates the sort of mixing up of accounting issues within the one question. Financial instruments, joint arrangements, and that little story about leases and how that impacts on ratios and how that impacts from the perspective of investors, a stakeholder angle there. And then I think about what is happening next in question 4 and the requirements of question 4. Surprise, surprise, the framework. You get within every SBR exam something on groups, something on ethics, something on the framework as well. That's another theme that really runs through. So it's talking about assets and liabilities, how that affects business combinations, and there's a revenue recognition issue there knocking around. Now I've navigated these pages by using the next button at the bottom, but of course you can equally jump to anything by going on the navigator page. And I'm going to jump back to question number 1. Now you're free to tackle the exam paper in any order that you want to. But my exam strategy is that we do question 1 first, because that's a question that we like, that we're good at, so that we can start in a confident manner. So here I am at the beginning. Yeah, I kind of know roughly what's in the paper. I've skimmed my way through, and I now want to pay closer attention to understanding what is happening in question number 1. Now, before I do that, there's just a couple of little things that I want to show you at the top of the screen there. You can see there's a calculator. So if you click on the calculator, you've got the opportunity of having it as a scientific or a standard mode. I think for SBR it's going to be standard mode. You can bring your own calculator into the exam. You don't have to use the online calculator. But if we want to take 7, plus 8, what does that give us? Gives us 15. No one's going to see that. It's not remembered, but it enables you to write that number 15 down in the exam. So that's how the calculator works. The scratch pad, what we've got here is the ability to write things down that we want to write down. Maybe we remind us that 1.8 minutes is worth 1 mark. If you sort of use the 15 minutes, 3 hour, 15 minutes, take the 15 minutes as a kind of review thing. So that if you're looking at a 10-mark question, then this is going to be worth 18 minutes. Nobody will ever see what you write in the scratch pad unless you copy it and cut it and drop it into your actual question. So there we are. I'm about to have a think about how I go about reading, how I go about answering, how I go about looking at the answer to question number 1, car bars. So for me, the starting point is going to be to look at the requirement. But before we do that, what we've got displayed here is some general information, some background information about Carboys, how it's a parent company with a presentation of functional currency of the dollar, how it's in the manufacturing sector, how on the 1st of January X2 it buys 80% of Bakelite. And it's important that we do, first of all, read this background information. It's relevant for setting the scene for the whole question. But let's now turn our attention specifically to the requirements. So it's a massive 30-mark requirement question, and we can move this around here. We can just select it and center it perhaps, and we can sort of scroll down the requirement, and it's 30 marks. Now, from having done previous mock exams, you should be aware that the format and the style of question 1 SBR exams is exactly this: 5, 6, 7 bitty little questions, each of which are standalone, and each of which relates to separate information within the question. And that's why we have these exhibits on the left. Now, the requirement of the question in part A, part 1, is what is meant by the entity's presentation and functional currency. Now, in order to know about the entity's presentational and functional currency, the information will be found in Exhibit 1, right? And that's the story about the transactions that it enters into. And if I jump ahead and I look at the requirement of Part C, is calculate the group profit loss on the disposal of Bakelite. And if you want to know about the final part of the requirement, you're going to read the Exhibit 3, because that's all the information about the disposal of Bakelite. So the simple point that I'm trying to make is that we're not going to have to read the whole requirement, we're not going to have to read the whole exhibit, we're not going to have to fully digest the whole question before we make a start. Because in the beginning, A part 1 is a written 7 marks about the entity's presentation and functional currency. And if you highlight those words first, you can effectively underline them, you can effectively highlight them like that. And that is a 7-mark requirement. A part 2, which I also want to have a look at in this presentation, is a calculation process. And all is happening in A part 2 is calculation, because all you're being asked to do is to calculate the goodwill, and then if you select first and then highlight, say what color you want it in, and there's another calculation that is required there. So this for me is going to be done the spreadsheet part, whereas A part 1 is going to be done in the word processing part. Now, what I would tend to do is to cut and paste, cut and copy this information. So we've got the requirement of the question for 7 marks, and I've selected that, and I'm going to go Control C. All right, I've done Control C. I'm going to open up the word processing, and I'm then going to dump in that information. So in my answer, I've got the requirement there in front of me. Now what you'll notice is the highlighting that you've done previously has been lost. C'est la vie. Don't spend too much time, therefore, on that process. We could effectively do it again here. Now I want to rescale this. Yeah, I want to rescale this, and I want this on the right-hand side. So I go to the bottom right-hand corner, and you can see as I maneuver, I can change the shape. So let me get something which looks like half a screen, and then I can sort of move that over to the right. For now, I'm going to close the requirement. That's not going to go away. But what I want to do is to open up this trading information again. And let me move that over there. I want to make that a little bit smaller so it doesn't interfere with either the top or bottom. And I'm now in a position to begin to sort of technically answer the question. Now, it's important for me that I'm friendly to the marker. So I say and highlight, this is clearly question 1. This is part A, and there it is. So what am I being asked to do? Prepare an explanatory note to the directors of Carboys, which addresses the entity's presentation and functional currency. Let me have a read of this information on the left-hand side to make sure that I can technically answer the question. The acquisition of Bakelite enabled Carboys to access new international markets. The transfer work in progress to Bakelite, which is then completed in various locations. Bakelite is overseas where the domestic currency is the dinar. So Bakelite is in an economy where the basic currency, the domestic currency, is the dinar. Staff costs are all paid in dinars, but we have other transactions in other currencies. 40% of its raw materials purchases are in dinars. Yeah, 40% of the raw material purchases are in dinars. 10% of dollars, yeah, this ratio. Revenue is invoiced in equal proportion in 3 different currencies. Revenue is invoiced in proportion in 3 different currencies. So we've got a right old mess here. They retain cash in 3 different currencies. No dividends have been paid. They've sought additional finance. And I need to breathe. What is the requirement of the question? What is meant by the entity's presentational currency? Okay, I'm going to start answering this question. All right. And for me, I think there's a mark for talking about the presentational currency. Now, you may remember that that's a group perspective. So companies have a choice about what currency they present. In other words, they publish their group accounts in. So let me say here, Carboys will have a choice as to which currency it will present its group accounts in. Any overseas subs that prepare their accounts in a local currency will have to translate their financial statements into the group's presentational currency. Now, 2 things to note. First of all, there's no spell check, so you don't want to be too obsessed with spelling. Yeah, but it's got to be legible. And you know, you can go back and you can make little changes. Read it again. Carboys will have a choice as to which currency it will present its group accounts in. Any overseas subs that prepare their accounts in a local currency, yeah, in a different functional currency, you could say, if you wanted to make it a little bit harder, a little bit tighter, will have to translate their financial statements into the group's presentational currency. Now, for me, yeah, I think that is definitely worth 1 mark. I am thinking it's 7 marks, and if it's 7 marks, it's 1 mark per valid point. So I'm therefore going to have a separate paragraph, yeah, and I'm going to try and challenge the marker to give me a mark for each point. Now, one of the things that I have deliberately done within that paragraph is to use the name of the company. So the group is Carboys, yeah, and so we're relating it to Carboys. Now, I'm not going to force you to painfully watch my typing skills and correction skills, so some of this answer is going to appear magically. What I will be saying is that this is an answer. This is my answer. This is not the examiner's answer. This is an answer that I judge, would be getting you a very, very comfortable pass. Now, for me, the majority of the marks are going to be around the functional currency, and that's a matter of judgment. So the functional currency is the currency of the primary economic environment in which we operate. So I feel confident that we would gain a mark for explaining that the functional currency of the company we're looking at, Bakelite, is that the primary currency of the economic environment in which it operates. Now, the information in the question talks about the domestic currency being the dinar. So if you like, the default is likely to be the dinar, but ultimately it is a matter of judgment as to what your functional currency is. And therefore, there are a number of factors and indicators that we will be looking to use to determine the functional currency. And the primary factors are to do with things like what currency you sell in, what currency you buy in, your buying transactions and your selling transactions, and how you're regulated. Now, when I look at the information in the question, I can see that staff costs and overhead expenses are all paid in dinars. Now, it's not too cheeky to cut and paste that, and to kind of drop that in to the word processing. And we can also effectively talk about how 40% of the raw material purchases are in dinars, but the others are in another currency. Now, as you begin to cut and paste these in, you'll notice the formatting is not kept. You've also got revenue being invoiced in equal proportions to those three currencies. So again, if you want to remind yourself, you can cut and paste and drop these things. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Click again on this and let us consider the primary factors. So I can say it is noted that the staff costs and overhead expenses are all paid in dinars, which suggests dinars are the functional currency. So you can see there one can apply our knowledge, our technical knowledge, into the situation by relating the primary factors. Your staff costs, overhead are all in dinars, which suggests that dinars are the functional currency. But when it comes to the purchases, only 40% are in dinars and only a third of the revenue is in dinars. So you've got this mixed situation. And in that mixed situation, it's necessary to then consider the secondary factors. So I want to introduce the secondary factors, giving a theoretical base. And really what the secondary factors are getting at is whether or not the overseas entity is a direct extension of the parent, in which case the functional currency will be that of the parent, or whether the overseas entity has some measure of independence. And if it has a measure of independence, if it's a trading operation rooted in that economy in its own right, then the dinar will be the appropriate currency to use. So what information do we have? No dividends have been paid by Bakelite. So that to me indicates that they're keeping the money and they are independent. They've sought additional debt finance and the funds were raised from an issue in dinars. So they're financed in dinars. They're not getting the money from carboys. None of that was acquired by carboys. So to me, this is leading to a natural conclusion that in fact we have a situation that the functional currency will ultimately be the dinar. And again, I can cut and paste, so I can select what I've highlighted there. I really like that. No dividends have been paid. I can sort of use the words it is noted. So Control C, I can take that across. Then I can Control V and put that in, and I don't think I'll bother with the other one. So I've cut and pasted the fact that no dividends were paid. I've picked up on the fact that the Bakelite raised funds independently and therefore concluded that the functional currency of Bakelite is the dinar. Now, again, applying it to the question, that means that when the subsidiary transacts in dollars, which it does, from the subsidiary's point of view, that is a foreign currency. And from the group's point of view, the fact that the subsidiary is preparing its accounts in dinars means that that will have to be translated into the presentational currency of the group. Now, I know there's a couple of minor spelling errors in there, doesn't matter. What matters to me is that I have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have done 7 sentences. Okay, I've done 7 mini paragraphs. Okay, and I have tried to, in every paragraph, relate it to the information within the question, and I have kept the requirement, in my view, at the top of the information. I have answered the question. I have explained what is meant by the presentational currency and the functional currency. I have explained that with reference to the presentational and functional currency. I've used the information there, so that I've had that in my view the whole time. So this is the answer that I would give. But for the record, what I haven't done is to describe the actual mechanical process of consolidation. What I haven't done is to talk about how, at the group stage, assets and liabilities are translated at the closing rate, for example. Because although that is true, this was not asked in the question. We must always answer the requirement of the question. Now I can close this. I don't have to save it. It's automatically saved. I can close that. I can close that. That goes away. If I want to see it again, I mustn't panic. There it is. It's still there. The information is still there. So I'm now going to answer the second part of the question. And if you remember, the second part of the question was to do with the calculation of the goodwill. So I could say here to the marker, A part 2, C spreadsheet. Because if I'm going to do a calculation, if the requirement is purely to do a calculation, then I should be doing that. And if I wanted to sort of plan ahead, the explanation, for 4 marks of the treatment of the goodwill, well, that would then be part of the processing. So again, you could drop that in, and then you've got here so on and so forth. But I'm now turning my attention to the requirements specifically of A part 2, which is a calculation, and therefore I want to open up a spreadsheet. And in opening up a spreadsheet, again, I need to resize that. So again, go bottom right hand corner, and I can sort of resize that. Let me sort of take it to half the page. Now, before we get too carried away, let's have a look at the requirement of the question and to copy into the spreadsheet those key requirements that we're being asked to do. And the first requirement is a calculation of the goodwill on the acquisition of Bakelite. So that is a key requirement that we are being asked to do, to calculate the goodwill on the acquisition of Bakelite. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to copy that, and this is in answer to question 1. This is in answer to question 1, part A, and we're doing it A part 2. And I just want to drop in the requirement is to the calculation of the goodwill on Bakelite. Now the second thing, and that word and, what the balance would be at 30 September, immediately before the disposal of the shares. So we're being asked to calculate goodwill a second time as to what it would be immediately before the disposal of the shares. So that's a second requirement. So leave a bit of space there and drop that in as a second requirement. And then thirdly, your answer should include a calculation of the exchange difference on the goodwill for the period from the 1st of Jan to 30 September. Exchange difference on the goodwill for that period of time. So again, yeah, that's a third requirement, a third number that we're going to have to calculate. So let me have a look at this, and let me think about leaving a bit of space here and dropping in that third requirement. So I understand what the three requirements are for 5 marks. Presumably it's a 2-2-1 or a 1-2-2, whatever. So I can therefore close off the requirements, because it's quite difficult to have too many of these windows open at the same time. Now, if we're going to do these calculations, the information is going to be in the second set of information, in the second appendix. That's where the information is to be found. So I need to get my act together. I need to get that information together in a way that enables me still to see the top and the bottom, and to have things neatly lined up. So here I am, I'm in the information, and I'm trying to calculate, first of all, the goodwill on the acquisition of Bakelite, and I have the information here to hand on the other side. So what information have we got? Well, Carboys has paid 100 million dinars for 80% of the share capital back in Jan X2, which is the date of acquisition, so that's relevant for the goodwill. The net assets of the date had a carrying value of 60, but there's a fair value adjustment required, and that fair value adjustment is 20 dinars, and it has a 20-year life. We measure NCI at fair value for all acquisitions, and the fair value is said to be 22. Due to the relative poor performance, there's an impairment of loss in December X5. Now we've got to calculate goodwill at the date of acquisition, and goodwill at the date of acquisition would have effectively 3 component elements to it. It would have the fair value of the parent's investment, it would have the NCI, and there's 2 ways of measuring NCI, but we're always told, and then we would have the fair value of the net assets acquired. Now let's have a look what information that we have. We seem to be told that the fair value of the parent's investment, they paid 100 million dinar. So this currency that we're giving the answer in is in dinar. The NCI is given to us at fair value, I think it said, and that there it is estimated to be 22 million dinars, so we can put that in at 22. And then thinking about the fair value of the net assets acquired is said to be 60, but then we got the fair value adjustment of 20, so I guess what we're doing is we are taking away 80. If you're not comfortable with that, that is effectively showing a small working of 60, plus the fair value adjustment of 20, and therefore mathematically I don't think we really need a calculator for that. The goodwill at the date of acquisition is 42. So that is the goodwill at acquisition, and that is 42. Now the trouble is that is at 42 dinars, and in the group accounts that's going to have to be translated, and it's going to be translated at the exchange rate at that date, the date of acquisition. Now, date of acquisition, the exchange rate here was $1 to 0.5 dinars, so 0.5 dinars. So the exchange rate we're using here is 0.5. We would end up dividing, and therefore we end up here with 84 dinars. End up there with 84 dinars. How do I get 84 dinars? Well, one way would be to effectively use a calculator. So you get your calculator going out there at 42. Divided by 0.5, and that would give you 84. It's a very basic spreadsheet. You could program it if you wanted to, but I think for these types of numbers, I think a use of a calculator is always going to be adequate for us. So that's the goodwill at the date of acquisition. We've now got to calculate the goodwill at the date immediately prior to the disposal of the shares. Now that's to do with the fact that the goodwill has been impaired. So we would be able to put in here our original calculation of goodwill that we know is 42. Then we have the impairment loss that occurs up until the year, before the year sort of December X5, and the impairment loss is effectively an impairment loss of 6, and therefore this gives us a goodwill of 36 before the disposal. Now, the goodwill that we have of 36 is again a dinar calculation of goodwill. And so we have to translate that using the exchange rate ruling at the date is closing rate, yeah? So what's the exchange rate on the 30th September? I see it is 0.35, so we're dividing by 0.35. So if we take our 36, and then we divide that by 0.35, we then end up here with our goodwill to be, well, let's round it. Life is too short for too many decimal places. So that is 102.9 in terms of dollars. So for the avoidance of any doubt, 102.9 in terms of dollars. And finally, we've got to calculate the exchange difference on the goodwill for the period from the 1st of Jan X6 to the 30th September X6. So we need to have understood that the impairment loss has occurred in the year ended 30 December X5. So if we're being asked to calculate the exchange difference on the goodwill from the period of 1st of Jan X5, that means our brought forward, that means our opening figure for goodwill in terms of dinars is that net figure of 36. So we got our opening figure of dinars of 36. Now, because goodwill is translated at the closing rate, the exchange rate ruling at the beginning of the year, at the 1st of Jan X6 is the same as the 31st of December X5. That exchange rate would be at 0.38. That exchange rate is at 0.38. So again, using the calculator, if we effectively take that 36 and we divide by 0.38, we get the goodwill in dollars of, let's call that 94.7. So we get the goodwill there in dollars of 94.7. And then we have to understand that at the 30th of September, the same goodwill still exists of 36, the impairment having taken place in the previous year. The same goodwill still exists. And this is then being translated at a new closing rate. And the new closing rate that we have at 30 September X6 is 0.35. And therefore, as a result of that, we get a different figure for goodwill. So we put into our calculator that we want to have the figure of 36, and we want to have that translated at the exchange rate of 0.35. And we therefore get, as a result, 102.9, I would suggest. And then we can see that these figures are different. And the only reason they're different is because the exchange rate has moved. The movement on that exchange rate, is the difference between those two numbers in the calculator. So, let me just clear that. So if we take here the difference between 102.9 and we take away from that 94.7, that gives us a difference of 8.2. And then we have to say to ourselves, well, that is our exchange difference on the retranslation of the goodwill. And then we have to say, is it a gain or is it a loss? Well, in my view, it's a gain because at the year end, or at 30 September, the asset is bigger than it previously was. All right, and that creates a gain. Now, there's a lot of theory around how that gain is accounted for, but that's a latter part of the question. And I've got my 5 marks here because I have done what I was asked to do. What was I asked to do? I was asked to calculate the goodwill. I did that $84 at the date of acquisition. What else was I asked to do? What was the goodwill immediately before the disposal? Well, in the meantime, it had been impaired by 6, so I've come up with 102.9. That is, again, the correct answer. And then I have my exchange difference, and I've calculated the exchange difference in that narrow period of time. Because I had copied and pasted the requirements into my spreadsheet, I knew the numbers that I was planning to do. I have left the space. I can close this knowing that it's not going to be deleted. I can close this and I can know it's not going to be deleted. I can go back to the word processor. I can see there, the next part of the question, explaining how I'm going to calculate the goodwill, whatever. And then I would need to look at the information and so on and so forth. Practice makes perfect. You are going to develop your own little style, how you use the spreadsheet, how you use the windows, how you like resizing it. These are tools that can be used in different ways, and you need to be embracing this. I know the word processing, I know the spreadsheet is not as sophisticated as the Word and the Excel spreadsheets that some of you may be familiar with. There isn't an automatic sum, for example. There isn't an automatic sum, for example, in the spreadsheet. There isn't a spell check in the word processing. But it's the same for everybody. And you've got to take a responsibility to make sure that you are proficient at this. And there's an advantage to this process because you can edit, you can go back and check. But time is limited. So make sure that you practice doing exam questions on the platform so that you are properly prepared for your SBR exam. Good luck in your SBR computer-based assessment exam. I have been Tom Clendon. Thank you very much for listening.